Hey kids, you sick of the same old thing on game night? I love me some Warhammer, but blah blah blah. I love D&D night, but all these campaigns are stale. But there's nothing else, there's nowhere to turn. Well, stop it. Just stop it. Because the Keep Studios has you covered. They've already released their first DCC, or Dungeon Crawling Classic, adventure, for the late person, called Sword in the Jungle Deep. And they're hard at work on their next one called Soul for the Ocean Dark. These names are awesome. This is tabletop RPGs written, created, and tested by fans of the genre. But Robbie, I don't want to spend buckets of money on a new game from a group I'm only now hearing about. What if it's not good? Well, you know what? Stop it again, because not only have I done work with these guys, but I've gamed with them. And on top of that, if that's not enough for you guys, you can get a 40% off discount through Drive-Thru RPG. What more can you ask for? So next game night, why not try out a real game created by real gamers over at thekeepstudios.com. The Keep Studios, game like you party, and by that, I mean hard.
Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to the Nerdynomicon.
Yeah, I can't top that. Welcome to the Nerdynomicon. I'm Robbie.
No.
Adrian is off with me right now.
It's welcome.
Oh.
Welcome.
My mistake. Obviously, I have a guest with me tonight. Welcome to the Nerdynomicon. I'm Robbie, and I've got an awesome guest with me. She already introduced herself, man. Why don't you tell the people who you are?
Hi, I'm the Maven of the Eventide, a.k.a. Elisa Hansen.
One of the coolest YouTubers I have seen in quite some time, and yet another member of Channel Awesome. I swear to God, we're gonna just attack the roster. We're coming for you, Doug Walker. I'm staring at a computer screen right now, but we're coming for you, Doug. So, Elisa, probably about 2 months ago or so, I'm working on one of my shows, and I just happened to go into the bedroom. My wife is laying back watching YouTube, like she does, and I see this really awesome woman on the television talking about The Lost Boys. So I sat down just to ask her a couple of questions, and I just keep on looking over at the screen. About 4 episodes later, I'm like, shit, I'm so behind on my work. And that was my barrier to entry. That was my foray into Maven of the Eventide, and I quickly became obsessed with everything you do. So tell us a little bit about your channel.
I am a vampire critic. I mostly am a film critic, but I critique anything with vampires in it. So books, comics, wine, beer, toys. I critiqued vampire perfume once, but mostly films, because in a video essay format, when you have something visual to show on the screen, it makes for a very nice video essay. So films and TV are where it's mostly at. But I talk about vampires and their history and impact on pop culture and the way that society reacts to them and the way they reflect society and how that's changed over the generations since they became an important literary figure around in the Victorian era.
You don't only just do these video essays, you also do it with class and you do it with humor. And the way you approach your topics is just spellbinding, because there's so many of these movies that I've even heard of and I've just decided, meh. And even movies like Byzantium, which I read the back of, I'm like, whatever, I'll get to it at some point. You actually made me want to check it out. You know, sometimes you rip them apart, and sometimes, you know, you kind of praise them a little bit, but no matter what, the way you approach them, they become instantly interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I give you a lot of credit on that.
Well, thank you. I am a vampire scholar. One day I will be a vampire expert, but for now I still consider myself a scholar of all things vampire.
Still studying the vamps. I get it. Mm-hmm. I get it. You know, the Winchesters have been doing that for, 12 seasons now? Something like that?
With it.
But what other kind of projects do you have working on? Because I stumbled across some other things that you just happened to pop into, and I'm like, what doesn't she do? Is she like a Swiss Army awesome person? I mean, what the fuck, man?
I'm also a writer, if that's what you're thinking of.
That is one of the things I was thinking of, yes.
So I have my own personal writing project, but you were mentioning the 50 Shades of Green project, which was the YA paranormal romance parody that I wrote with Nella and Lindsay a few years ago. And that's published. It's on Amazon. You can find it if you want to. But personally, I write mostly sci-fi, fantasy, horror. I have a novel right now that I'm shopping with agents and publishers, trying to get out there. And right now, I'm also working on a novel about being a YouTuber. It's fictionalized, but it's based a lot on our personal experiences. And it's got YouTubing, harassment, and murder.
I would like to buy your YouTuber fictionalized story for... shit. I got $11 and a Jim Stakeout card. I would like to buy that. Fuck, that sounds like a good idea. You know, I can't think of anybody that's really tackled that subject either. And YouTubers are blowing up in a big, bad way. Mm-hmm. I mean, hell, our channel just moved over to YouTube. Check out the new batch, by the way. Information's in the show notes. What made you get started and stuff like that? I mean, obviously the YouTuber, write what you know. But some of these other, you said like sci-fi, fantasy, you're a vampire critic. Is that the type of stuff that you're writing? Because I do apologize, I've not read any of your writing. That's
okay. So the book that I'm shopping right now is a Monster Mash. And Monster Mashes are my favorite thing. And of course, there's always got to be vampires in a Monster Mash.
Like you do.
But yeah, the main character is actually the Grim Reaper in this book, who is, you know, despite my obsession with vampires, the Grim Reaper is actually my favorite of all things. And I know that there are some books out there with the Grim Reaper as a character, such as Discworld. But most books that I've seen aren't serious. They're all comedies.
Right.
Or some sort of humorous take. And you never have this character have a serious story that's not bad. So I wanted to write one of my own with the Grim Reaper as a protagonist. And that's what I did.
Damn. You know, you said that. And you're right. I can only think of one novel that featured the Grim Reaper as the protagonist that wasn't A, humorous, or B, bad. That was... I have no idea how I found it, but it was Legends of... Incarnations of Immortality, and it was the first book on a pale horse.
Is that the Piers Anthony book?
I think so, yeah.
But see, he's just a guy. He's a human that becomes the Grim Reaper.
Right.
I'm looking for something that's the actual, like, death incarnate, always has been, always will be. They're not out there.
No, they're not. That version of it, no, they're not. I mean, even Dead Like Me, which has the humor angle to it, you know, they're disembodied souls. They used to be human, they become reapers. Mm-hmm. Damn, that's awesome.
So I wrote a book. I don't know if you'll like it, but if it gets published, well, when it gets published, because if I don't have any luck with agents and publishers, I plan to self-publish like we did with our sexy Cthulhu book, Awoken. But it'll be out there soon, sooner or later.
If you don't get picked up, if you have to go the self-publishing angle, let us know. We'll talk all about it on here. We'll let everybody know, hey, it's being self-published. This is where you can get it. Because that sounds fucking awesome.
Well, thank you.
I'm not just saying that. I don't just say things like that on the show, man. If I like something, I praise the hell out of it. You can ask Ben Grisanti, Polybius Dreams. People have been annoyed as hell with me for championing that book for the better part of a year. That sounds really damn cool. So, you're into vampires. You're obviously into the Grim Reaper. Let's talk Secret Origins. Tell us about the young Maven. Before she became the Maven of the Eventide, was she the Maven of... the Dawn with a serial little bit of OJ? I mean, how did we get started here?
I've always been into dark stuff. I was super obsessed with Phantom of the Opera for most of my preteen into teenage into college years. Mm-hmm. And Phantom of the Opera is a Death in the Maiden story, so another sort of Grim Reaper spin-off. And that's always been my favorite kind of motif. You look at it as a Beauty and the Beast story, but with a tragic ending. And that's sort of the difference between a Beauty and the Beast story and a Death in the Maiden story. And vampires have a natural connection to death and the maiden, especially with all the sexy vampires that have sort of taken over the world in the past few decades.
If only vampires were sexy back in the day when I used to dress up with them as for Halloween, man. I still wouldn't have done any better with the ladies, but you know what? At least I would have had a fighting chance. You know, just throw some glitter on myself, show up at the school dance, and... Oh. But yeah, I can relate to that. I've always been into the dark stuff, too. I mean, my dad introduced me to horror movies at a very, very inappropriate age. I'm planning on waiting at least 2 or 3 more years before I introduce Max to that stuff. But on the upside, I grew up learning a lot of lore. Like, at age 5, I was taking an entire thing of salt with me to bed just in case the Warlock from the movie Warlock showed up and tried to kill me and steal my fat to fly. So...
Well, good you were prepared.
I was definitely prepared.
Now, my son, who's 3, amused me the other day by pointing at one of the skulls on my shelves. And I have many skulls on my shelves, but some of them are more realistic looking and some are more cutesy looking. So it points at one that happens to be, it's like a vampire skull, so it has fangs. He points at it and says, that's awesome. Scary, Mommy, that's scary. And I'm like, yeah. And then he points at one that's like a salt shaker skull, and he goes, that's not scary. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, but is it too scary? Do you want me to put it away? And he's like, no, I like it. Like, good on you, child.
Right on, man.
That's what I want to hear.
Right. You're raising the kid right.
He can acknowledge that something is scary, but he likes it.
I love that. That's one thing that I'm starting to get sad about. Max is at that age where he's starting to become more impressionable. You know, pretty soon he's going to have cognizant memory. He's starting to pick up words. And all last year, as part of his nap time ritual, I would take him into the bedroom, lay him down right next to me, and we'd watch The Walking Dead or Fear the Walking Dead together. Because he's that age, he doesn't even know what's going on. He's not going to remember it or anything. So I would use that time to catch up on, you know, some of my shows, Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, some of the other ones I like to watch. I can't do that anymore, and I am so sad. He's at that age where I just don't feel right about doing it, but... I have one skull up here that has a raven on it. He hasn't pointed to that yet.
I have a skull with a raven on it. I wonder if it's the same one.
It could be. We should exchange selfies with our skulls. All right, so you've been into this stuff from a young age. What made you decide to branch into YouTube and writing? Like, was there a barrier to entry? You just woke up one day and you're like, I have thoughts. The world needs to hear the thoughts of Maven.
Well... I was working with my friend Lindsay Ellis, who you may know as Once Upon a Time being the Nostalgia Chick.
Once Upon a Time, is she not Nostalgia Chick anymore?
She is not. She is Lindsay Ellis, video essayist. And when she was Nostalgia Chick, sometimes she was living with me at the time. She would ask me for input or thoughts or ideas, or sometimes I would hold the camera while we did something silly. And then... got to a point where she needed someone in the video doing something ridiculous, so she would bring me on sometimes. And I got more and more involved with her, going from just random cameos to actually becoming a staff writer for a time. And during that period, I had a lot of ideas that she wasn't necessarily interested in. And she was like, why don't you do them yourself? And all my other friends who were part of Channel Awesome at the time or YouTube were saying, yeah, you should do your own show. And I had a lot of encouragement from them. So I was looking at all these ideas I had, and it eventually became Maven of the Eventide brings you vampire reviews. And I knew I wanted to do something dark and spooky because that's always been my aesthetic. And I settled on vampires just because there's so many vampire stories out there. And I like having a theme. I like having parameters. I've always worked well in like categories and boxes. So just saying I can talk about anything as long as there's a vampire in it sounded like a really fun challenge to me. And a lot of people have said to me, aren't you worried you're going to run out of things to talk about? No. There's over 400 vampire films out there, not to mention TV and books and everything. It's never going to end. I guess my main concern is I might start repeating myself because I like to try to say what the vampire represents, because vampires are windows on humanity. So each vampire is going to reflect a certain aspect of humanity, and perhaps I'll run out of aspects of humanity to talk about before I run out of vampires.
If there's anything that 2016 has shown us, I don't think that that's going to happen, at least anytime soon. I think 50 Shades of Grey was probably a couple hundred light. We don't really get into politics on the show, but I'm just going to leave that there. So that's why you got into it. Now let me go a little bit deeper. Why Maven of the Eventide? Why that name and why that persona?
I love Elvira.
There it is.
And I wanted to do something similar to her, but much less good. I wanted to be... Because Elvira, she's legit. She is
right.
Sexy, but I wanted to play this persona who maybe wishes she was that sexy, and of course never can, because you can never be as cool as Elvira.
Right.
So I don't do any of that innuendo stuff. But... we sort of had this long-running joke with all of the Channel Awesome personalities. None of us were cool. Nobody on Channel Awesome was cool, especially not in 2011. We were all a bunch of nerdy, lonely shut-ins who just talk at our cameras about our nerdy passions. So playing a nerdy, lonely, shut-in wannabe Elvira character is how I came up with that. And it's a lot of me in it. I don't go out in public like that, but I'm not faking it either. And Maven of the Eventide is just sort of a search and replace synonym version of Mistress of the Darkness.
I kind of picked up on that. And to be honest with you, it took me quite a few viewings of your shows on YouTube to try to figure out, now, are you going as like a fledgling vampire, a la, or someone that wants to be initiated into the vampire culture, a la What We Do in the Shadows, which we reviewed on our show? Or is it more like an Elvira thing?
A lot of people in my comments act as if they think Maven is supposed to be a vampire, and she sure wishes she was, but she's not. I think she is someone who wishes she was a vampire, but has certainly never met one, wants to believe that they're real, but isn't quite convinced that they are, because she hopes that if they were, they would have come to her by now. Gotcha. And yet she thinks werewolves are real, and that, some people out there are werewolves, but she is not a vampire. And, I've even had her say on the show, like, vampires are fictional. They're not real. So therefore they can be anything you want them to be. And, when people say, well, a real vampire is blah, 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 not sparkly or not this or not that. It's like, they're not real. They're allegories. They could be anything you want them to be. But she still holds out hope,
That's a pretty damn succinct answer. And I really like... You really took it that way. It sounds like the Maven of the Eventide is just an aspect of one of your shades of personality that you just kind of let come out and play every once in a while. And I think that that's damn cool. I think we should all have, like, especially in a format like YouTube or, a format like me with my podcasting, we have alter egos that are still a version of ourselves that it's still truth, but it's not the version that you may be out in the world. Unfortunately, who you hear on this show is basically who you'd be having dinner with. But when I go crazy and stuff like that, I'm not as vulgar all the time as I am on this show. But I think that that's really cool. It sounds like it's an aspect of you that you just want to embrace and throw out there as a character for the world. For better or for worse. I really like that. I think more people should do that.
It's fun.
It's got to be good therapy, too.
Oh, yeah. Because I have all these gothy clothes that I've been collecting for years. I started buying sort of spooky clothes maybe halfway through high school. And I still have stuff that I had in high school. And I would collect all these clothes. I'd buy them used, or I'd get them on eBay, or when stuff was on sale. And I have all these corsets and all these frilly black things that just sit in my closet, and I never wear them because, I have a sense of shame, and I'm too shy to go out in public in these things. I don't have a community. I don't have a goth community where I live. Even when I lived in New York, I didn't have that. None of my friends were into it. So to have a reason to wear all these clothes that I've been collecting for years and enjoy them and just be like, this is my job now. It's like, this is the best thing. Like, if I could go back in time and tell kid me, like, you're going to be, a spooky gothic horror host when you grow up, I would have been crying with joy.
You would have collected all the corsets at that point. You would have gone to corset conventions. I want whalebone, bitch. None of this steal shit from me. Whalebone or nothing. So even as when you were a kid, you didn't wear these clothes. You just kind of collected them.
Right. I went through a phase in high school where I started wearing only black and red, but it was like red jeans, it wasn't that much. And in college, I mostly only wore black, but it wasn't corsets and safety pins and leather and laces. It was just black clothes you could buy at the store. I was never brave enough to really go all the way in because I was alone. I was the only person that was like that in any community I've been in.
Right.
So my coolest outfits just sat in the closet and collected dust.
Well, I'm glad you finally have a reason to bring them out. I got rid of a lot of my clothes that I had like that when I was younger. I mean, it wasn't the cool corsets and whatnot. Granted, it might have improved my figure, but who's to say? I had a lot of 69-inch bottom pants. I had a lot of Trip, Inalig, Jinko, kickwear. I was in the sexual awakening of my life in my teenage years wearing pants that guaranteed I was never going to get laid. So I'm glad that you can wear those clothes. I threw mine out a long time ago. Although now I collect pop culture-inspired shirts.
Nerd shirts are cool.
I love them. I really do. We've talked a little bit about your aspect of Maven. We've talked about how you got into it. What do you enjoy most about doing this show? Like, you dive deep into lore. Like, that's one thing I love about your shows is even when you're talking about something like Nosferatu, you're diving deep. Like, you're going all the way back to the advent of, or the written advent of vampires in some of these videos. And you're kind of talking about their influences in pop culture. What are some of your favorite things to discuss?
The more I talk about vampires and the more I be like, well, I talked about that aspect last time. So what different angle can I approach it from this time, and trying to look at the different ways, because a lot of vampires stand for multiple things, but I try to be concise in my videos. So that challenge of really picking a thesis statement and running with it is always fun. And, my show is a feminist show. So a lot of times I'll talk about things from a feminist angle, and I talk about a lot of queer theory as well, as a queer person, but I can't talk about that every time. So sometimes I'll mention, like, yes, there is a queer aspect to this vampire, but that's not what we're focusing on. This time we're focusing on this, social outcast aspect, or this xenophobic aspect, or this, in Nosferatu's case, reaction to World War II disparaging after national tragedy aspect.
Right.
And just coming up with something different each time is an exciting challenge, but it's also really hard. And when I do it, I feel like really accomplished, kind of like writing an essay for, in like high level literature class, and you write a really good essay and then you get an A on it and you're like, yeah, I'm awesome. I'm so smart. Look at me, man.
That song from the Lego movies playing in your head. You're dancing down the street.
And it's just kind of a rush to like feel like I've done something intelligent. And whether people agree with my interpretation or not, I've had commenters that will be like, well, this is just like your opinion, man. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but it's a valid one because I did my research and I did my homework and I feel proud of it and I stand behind it. So if you don't agree with my interpretation, that's cool. You could write your own essay on this topic if you want to go do your research too.
Extremely accurate. And I honestly kind of hope that you call some of these people out like that when they get really snotty. Obviously not in the comments, because that kind of could, affect your brand, but, people like that need to be put on blast sometimes.
A lot of times I don't have to. Someone will say something like that, and then 5 other people will come into my comments and be like, you're being really condescending to her right now. And I'm like, yes, thank you, friends.
Do you have a special nickname that you give your fans?
I don't. Should I?
Well, Ralph Garman, he's got his fans that are called the Garmy. Our fans we call cultists. I didn't know if you had like a nickname for your fans, like, hello, Fangbangers, or something like that. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
Usually the fans come up with that. I can't just decree you are now all Mavenites or something. Like, let them develop their own identity as a fan base, and then I will put my stamp of approval on it.
Fair enough. In that case, hello, all you Mavenites.
No, that's a horrible name.
I'm going to run with that. I'm going to drive this train all the way down. I'm joking. It'll go no further than here. So, you said that you like to approach these videos also from a feminist angle. And I've noticed that on several videos. By the way, I want to give you huge kudos for the way you approach the subject matter and let the right ones in. Because that was a really, really interesting and powerful movie, and book going in, reverse order. I've got to be honest with you. I really enjoyed all of the iterations. Probably the American one the least, but the way you attached so much significance to so many of these characters in ways that I didn't even realize at first was really, really cool. Specifically, the commentary on the trans movement in that. I thought that was really cool. What made you decide to attach it or attack it from that angle?
Well, I did a video a few years ago called Top 10 Female Vampires. And when I did that video, I got a lot of comments, people saying, why didn't you include Ely from Let the Right One In or Abby from Let Me In? And having read the book first, 8 years ago and then seen the movie since, I was like, because Ely's not a female? Why would I include Ely in this? But then it occurred to me that a lot of people who had seen the movie only didn't realize that because it's so vague in the movie. And in Let Me In, she is a female. Like, they changed it.
Right.
And I wouldn't include the one who is a female in the top 10 female vampires list because I don't think that's a good way to treat a female character, to like femaleify a genderly ambiguous character. So that doesn't make my top 10 list. But, getting those comments, and I still get comments like that over the years. People are still commenting on my old videos. And I've seen other comments of people saying, well, is Ely a trans female? Would you include a trans female on a list like that? But I was like, I don't think Ely is a trans female. And I don't know if the people who were interpreting it that way were trans people themselves or not. But it put that thought in my head. And then I was talking to some of my trans friends about it. I was like, well, what do you feel about this book? And they gave me that insight to say that, like, when someone has pieces of their body removed, they don't just say, well, I guess I'll be trans now. Like, that is not a thing that happens in the real world, despite even doctors to this day think if someone is born intersex and they think, well, we'll just remove this part of their anatomy and leave that part of their anatomy and raise them that way, it doesn't work. Like,
right.
That's not a real thing that happens in the real world. And I felt the author of Let the Right One In was perhaps ignorant of that. And I've seen articles by other essayists talking about the vampire as a trans metaphor in general, with that whole I have a secret identity that is dangerous perspective. So to look at that vampire allegory from a vampire who actually had those gender issues as well made it that much more interesting.
Wow, that is a great answer. Fuck, did you prepare for this interview?
Well, I just talk about vampires a lot, so, I'm used to it.
Wow, okay. So, before we got the episode rolling, you said that you really also wanted to talk about the feminist angle that you try to approach in your videos. What specifically, are you, like, trying to educate people on the feminist angle of these movies? Or,
it didn't start out that way, right? So I've always been very girl power. But back when I started this series, back in 2011, I don't think I even understood what a feminist was. And since then, in the past 6 years, I've learned a lot about the world. But it happened organically. And I get a lot of, not a lot, but every once in a while, I'll get a comment that's like, well, why do you have to bring feminism into it? Everything you talk about vampires, you're just talking about racism and misogyny, and you must hate men. And I've been called a man hater, and I've been called I've been called a dyke, and all kinds of sort of insults that are trying to put me down. And people say, well, why can't you just look at these movies and, talk about the movies for the content and stop bringing all these interpretations into it? And I'm just like, well, here's the thing. Vampires came into existence as a socio-political metaphor. You cannot talk about vampires without talking about social issues. And one of the biggest social issues in the world are gender issues, because it kind of is a line between half the people in the world. And it's a big thing. And it has been since vampires emerged as an important literary figure in the Victorian era. Especially gender issues were huge in the Victorian era. And to talk about feminism and vampires, especially in vampires, when you have female vampires that are so sexified, that you can't avoid it. And for these few individuals to come to me and say, well, why do you have to bring this into it? I was like, dude, it was there. It was always there. And me talking about it was apparently inevitable, because I certainly didn't plan to go into it talking about it this way. And it happened naturally. And the more I do it, the more I see the value in that. And anytime I get one of those comments that's like, why do you have to be political? Why do you have to be man-hating? It's not me. It's the world. I'm just the one who's pointing it out to you.
I think I've watched almost all of your videos. I haven't watched all of the Pumptoberfest videos, but I've never really seen a man-hating aspect to your videos. Like, am I watching them wrong?
Some fellows are very sensitive, my friend. Some people are very sensitive.
Wow, dear Lord. What would Jesus do, guys? Come on, cowboy up. Let's go. I don't see the man-hating aspect of that at all. The feminism aspect, I do see. As a matter of fact,
to some people, any expression of feminism is man-hating, because some people think feminism means female supremacy, not equality.
You know what? That's very, very fair. I mean, for probably a little bit of my life, I did admittedly equate feminism with feminazism, with the whole man-hating and stuff like that. But once you move out of a town that has one stoplight in it and it's front page news when a horse dies in the middle of the street, you realize that is not the case. That is an extremist way of looking at things. So, yeah, feminism is not supremacy, it's equality.
And some people take issue with the word root fem in the name, but it's just semantics at this point. The idea is what it is. And, I've talked about the male gaze as well, and people take issue with that. And the male gaze is something it's a film theory term, the male gaze. I didn't invent it, but people treat me like I'm accusing males of doing something wrong by the fact that this film theory term exists. Mm-hmm. And it's just people being oversensitive.
Yeah, for sure. Admittedly, before I really dove deep into your videos and realized, you really do have a lot to say about, race, about gender equality, about trans, frankly. I admit I was a little bit like, why isn't Tales from the Crypt Bordello of Blood on there? Well, I think I get it now.
I'll probably get to it one of these days.
Admittedly, I just always found that to be a fun movie when I was younger. I haven't seen it in probably 8 or 9 years, but admittedly, I love Dennis Miller and Corey Feldman.
Bet there's more socio-political underscoring to it than you realize.
More than likely. I don't know. Robert Zemeckis tends to have that woven into his properties, and Tales from the Crypt was Zemeckis, so it's probably further in than I realize. You're right. And again, I haven't watched it in a very long time.
You can't look at vampires or monsters or anything kind of supernatural at all without something sociopolitical being involved. It's going to be there. That's why these fantastical things exist. It's because people are exploring themselves through their imaginations. They never exist just to exist. There's always something deeper.
There's always a reason. Just like Maven of the Eventide, your persona, there's always a reason that it comes out, Yeah,
and even if it's subconscious, like someone would be like, no, I'm just making a monster to be a scary monster, and I don't have any deeper agenda to this. I'm just making it. Consciously, no, but subconsciously, something in that person's culture led them to that result, led them to think this is scary for a reason. This has an impact on people's emotions and hearts for a reason, and it's going to be there if you go into the psychosis of it enough.
Damn. As far as vampires, now, you've gone deep into the lore of vampires, and you've also talked about how they've become a symbol, an embodiment, an avatar, if you will, of viewing the world, the sexual repression aspect, the male dominance aspect, the woman as seductress, in the case of that one vampire with the M. The one that you talk about. No, not the M. Camilla. That's the one.
Carmilla.
Carmella. Thank you.
Well, her real name was Milkara. Carmilla was just a pseudonym, so you were right with the M. Yes.
I wasn't wrong. I knew. See, I've done my research for this as well. But did vampires have this type of presence even far back in folklore? Because you've also educated a lot of people about the origins of vampires in your videos, too.
The folklore vampire is very different from the literary vampire. The folklore vampire was not a seducer. The folklore vampire was more like a zombie, and was usually a family member has died and come back and preys on their own family. And this comes from disease. You know, when someone in your family dies, you may have been close to that person, so therefore you will also catch this disease and you will also die. It was this imaginative way to explain something they didn't understand that was really scientific. Mm-hmm. But the folklore vampire was something that was much more of a shambling revenant. Often it was conflated with the werewolf. The werewolf origin came from the vampire origin. But this thing that came back from the dead to kill off the rest of the family or people that were associated with this dead person. And there was nothing seductive about it, nothing deceptive about it. It was very monstrous and very brainless. But the literary vampire is a whole different creature. And it takes a lot of its fun supernatural stuff from the folklore, but its thematic stuff about what it reflects of the society it's attacking doesn't really have to do with that.
How far back does the folklore go?
Oh, thousands of years. I mean, it was big in when the Black Death was big in the 1400s, medieval times. It got really big. But you know, there's vampire legends in China, and they have a much ancienter history than we Westerners do.
Yes.
And there's zombie legends in Africa, and all these things of these dead creatures coming back. You can go deep into cultures with them, but they're always very different. The further back you go, the further they get away from what the vampire is to us nowadays.
Right. Glittery and immortal and can go out in the sunlight.
But still, so tortured. So tortured.
We did an entire episode. We probably could have done fucking three episodes on it, but we kept it to one just for time's sake. We did an entire episode about cryptids and the possibility of if these creatures did exist, could exist, and what they might be if they were real. With all of these legends scattered throughout the world, you brought up China, which I had no idea about. To my knowledge about
vampires.
Hopping vampires?
Hopping vampires. It's a Chinese myth. I'm don't have much Chinese history experience, so I can't tell you that much about it, but it's there.
She's dropping knowledge bombs on me, man. My knowledge on vampires only really goes back to the plague. And, you know, as far as like the trickles of blood down the mouth, you know, bubonic plague and whatnot, stakes through the heart, which, if I remember correctly, were more for revenants than they were for vampires, although now I'm thinking they might have been the same thing.
They were. And tuberculosis, or AKA consumption, they're like, what is consuming all the blood out of these people? Why are they being consumed with the consumption? And it must be a vampire sneaking in. And, you know, these vampires were invisible, floating, ephemeral things, not a person coming in and biting your neck, but it was something that was drawing this energy out of you.
So vampires at that time, they were incorporeal? Is that what you're saying?
They could be, yeah. A lot of those actual folklores had incorporeal vampires.
So I guess, and this is where the conversation's probably going to either abruptly end or it's going to get kind of weird. Do you believe that something like this could have, at some point in the history of the world, actually existed?
No. I'm a scientist. I believe in science. I believe in disease. Would I like for it to exist? Sure. The second I see it, I'll be like, rad, I'm on board. But I'm a very, you have to see it to believe it kind of person. Show me a ghost. Please show me a ghost. I would love to believe in ghosts, but until I see one, I'm not going to.
Bigfoot? Don't believe in Bigfoot?
No. I feel if Bigfoot existed, we would have found some bones by now.
You and Adrian would get along so great. God damn. Ruin all my fun.
I would love to believe. Please prove me wrong. Please. Please.
I will accept your challenge and head to the Pacific Northwest and then upward to Canada. Because Bigfoot's not there anymore. Portland's a thing. Bigfoot's like, fuck this, I'm out. It's not happening.
He doesn't want to wear, like, black rimmed glasses and get some coffee?
Hell no, man. He's seen He's seen Portlandia. He knows what's up. He knows that it's where young people go to retire at this point. He's like, Portland? No, I'm out of here. Now, you also talk about vampires in pop culture. Do you think that these movies are, and the way the vampires are portrayed, are a reflection of pop culture? Or do you think at certain points they actually influence pop culture? Or both, frankly?
Both. I mean, vampires come and go in waves. So, what, like 8 years ago when Twilight really happened? Because Twilight was a slow creep because it was a novel and then it kind of exploded. But then we had a wave. And then there were all these imitators, all these vampires. And then people were sick of vampires and vampires fell off again. But Twilight wasn't the first vampire explosion. They have come and gone. And they'll come back.
What kind of vampires do you want? Like, when you're thinking about, you have this trope there, our vampires are different. What is a vampire you're dying to see?
Huh. My favorite vampires are the ones that were big in the late 70s and 80s. But I don't need to see those again because we already had those.
Mm-hmm.
I
wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of a resurgence, but... If
I could think of, like, the next great thing in vampires, I'd be writing that book right now and making it happen. You know, some genius is going to come up with that idea. And alas, it is not me.
I've got some ideas. As you were talking about that, I started brainstorming, what is something vampiristic that I would like to see that could really, scare me? Because to me, vampires have gone the way of the dodo bird as far as being scary. I don't generally get scared of vampires anymore.
Well, see, the thing that's scary about a vampire, traditionally, is someone comes to you. You meet them, you sort of get to know them, you sort of fall for them, you sort of trust them, you're attracted to them, you're alluring, and this person is important to you, and then you find out they're completely not what you thought they were.
Right.
And you've invested all this emotional energy, this vulnerability into becoming close to this person, and then your illusions are shattered. Turns out they're the most opposite thing of what you thought they were. Your heart is broken. That is the fear. That is the horror. And that's something, that happens to people every day with normal humans.
Oh, God, yeah, it does.
Yeah, but that's what the vampire represents. That kind of heartbreak of someone that you thought was so wonderful turns out to be a monster. That deception, that deliberate trickery, that you lied to me all alongness, which is a real villainous thing to do.
Right.
And on that sort of heartbreak, love, vulnerability, emotional level, I can't think of anything scarier than being completely betrayed.
That is certainly true. Now, tell me if this has been done before. You meet, as far as vampire movies or vampire stories go, guy meets girl meets guy, or girl meets girl, guy meets guy, it doesn't really matter. And everything's going fine, and then as soon as feelings are involved, boom, the vampirism turns. Because I had this thought, what if the curse of the vampire has been so bastardized and perverted over time? What if it's not the need for blood and, the need to stay away from the sun? Maybe the sun is an aspect to it. I just thought, as far as my vampires are different, what if it's love that turns them to that feral creature state? Like, part of the vampiric curse is you destroy the one you love, and in this case, in its entirety. It's not you hurt them or crush them. There's that aspect too, but that is the one you literally devour. So this vampire can never feel love.
That's what Carmilla's anguish was. Like, Carmilla, the more she loved someone, the more she wanted them, the more she essentially wanted to kill them. Mm-hmm. So anytime she was like, I can never be happy, apparently. And, you see this in Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Angel. As soon as he, has sex with Buffy, he reverts his soulless place and,
Damn it, Angel, I forgot about you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Yep, my vampires are not different.
But there's different ways to write it. They say there's nothing new under the sun. Every story has already been told. The difference is the way you present it. So don't be discouraged. Something about your voice will make it interesting to someone else.
I will save this vampire and I'll stick it away for a rainy day. Everybody's out there listening. Yeah, that's fucking wonderful. Finish up the ghost podcast that you're working on. It's in production right now. Don't worry about that. Yeah, I completely forgot about Angel. As I'm thinking about this as I'm listening to one of your videos, driving around. I'm like, ooh, I should bring this up. This sounds cool. Then you just name drop 2 vampires things. I'm like, well, god damn it. I got nothing on that.
Like I said, someone brilliant is going to come up with the next new thing in vampires, but it's not me. Probably not you.
Yeah,
it's going to be someone.
Just twist that knife. Someone brilliant. Douche.
We are not. If you're out there listening, stop listening to us and start writing, please.
Absolutely. Give us that next vampire, man. Let's switch this over to the Grim Reaper, and then we'll close out with a couple more questions. Grim Reaper, why don't we see more of that in movies? We see it as like a background character, and I'm asking because you said that that's one of your favorite literary creatures. Why don't we see more of that? You see it in Dead Like Me in that aspect. You see it in Supernatural in a certain aspect. Why not more?
Probably because it's such an ephemeral idea that it's not really a person. So to make it a person, you have to come up with a character, and a lot of those characters are rooted in humanity. So you see these versions like Upon a Pale Horse and the Dead Like Me, where you have humans who get put in that situation. Like, now you're the new Santa Claus. Now you're the new Grim Reaper. Same
the Grim
idea.
Reaper, now starring Tim Allen. I love it.
So to make a character, a personality of something that was never human, it's been done. Obviously, Terry Pratchett did it in Discworld, but it's not something a lot of people will take seriously. So people don't use it seriously. They'll use it for humorous effect or political commentary or something like that.
Right. I think the only time I've ever seen it used in earnest was only a couple of episodes of Supernatural and obviously the Castlevania series. I mean, Death is a very large character in many of these games.
You don't take him seriously. You kick his ass and then you're like, yeah, I beat Death. I'm awesome now. And poor Death is just like degraded.
Touche. But Death always comes back. He comes back more times than Dracula in those games.
Yeah. And then you look at something like, I don't know, Family Guy.
Yeah, Norm Macdonald.
Like, let's look at Death being like, weird and not spooky. Like we would assume he'd be spooky. No, he's just a guy. And that's more interesting to people.
True. I mean, especially with Seth MacFarlane, he uses, instead of using like horror to get his message across, he uses humor. And I think it's far more effective right now in The Orville than it was in Family Guy. I don't know. I just never got behind Family Guy. One question before we wrap up here that I always love to ask our guests. What is one question you've always wanted to answer but never had the opportunity? And what's your answer?
So, I've been writing a lot. I'm writing this book about being a YouTuber. Mm-hmm. And I wrote my other book. And both of my main characters in those books are Asian Americans. Okay. And I am not Asian American. And I sort of imagine being asked this question of why write someone whose race who you not are? How dare you, presume to tell a story of a person from a culture who you not are? And I've imagined my answer or what it might be. And both of those stories are feminist stories because everything I do is feminist. Mm-hmm. And especially in my book about the YouTuber is we have so many stories starring white girls. Do we really need another, first of all? So I could write someone who's not white. But am I the right person to write a non-white story? Shouldn't I leave those to the non-white authors? Perhaps I should, but if I'm writing a story anyway, I don't want to put another white girl main character out there in the world. And the other thing is especially in the YouTube story where she's dealing with all this online harassment that's very misogynist, very sexist focused, such as I and my friends have received in our online careers, is a lot of the feminist reactions and movements have been dominated by these quote unquote hashtag white feminists that can be very silencing of the voices of women of color. And when I was thinking about this main character, I thought, well, I could make her white like me and sort of make her a bit of a self-insert. I mean, and she is a bit of a self-insert because there's a lot of my personal experience to her. Or I can make her something not white and tell a feminist story with the added element of race, because there are so many feminist things out there that silence the voices of women of color because they think race will distract from the feminism. And I didn't want to contribute to that if I could avoid it.
Right.
And I modeled both of these characters off of friends of mine who I have very close personal relationships with, and used their thoughts and insights to develop them as cultural people and, you know, get sensitivity readers and make sure you're doing the absolute best you can. And if anyone does ever ask me that question, why is your main character Chinese American? I'd be like, because A, do we need another white girl? B, women of color need their voices too. No, I am not the person to give that a voice, but I didn't want to contribute to the opposite of that voice. So I'm doing the best I can, and I hope it helps.
That is a phenomenal question. That is a phenomenal reason to ask that question, and really your answer is quite poignant.
Okay.
So, all right, that's the Halloween aspect of this episode. Elisa, do you have a little bit more time in you? Do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the feminist angles? I've got some... I want to hear your opinion on some of the other things that are going on pop culture-wise.
Yeah,
outside of the horror realm.
Sure.
All right, guys, that's going to be it for the horror thing. You know where to find us. Check out Maven of the Eventide. Seriously, it fucking phenomenal, man. You can find a link to her YouTube page in the show notes. Where else can they find you if they want to get some of your other projects?
Just Google Elisa Hansen. I'm the only one that comes up. But if you go to YouTube and look for vampire reviews, I'm the first one that comes up too. So just look for vampires. I will be there.
And you know where to find us, man. Email us, tweet at us, Nerdynomicon all the way around. Check out the new batch on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Nerdynomicon. And if you guys are feeling generous, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Nerdynomicon. We got some awesome rewards in there. So if you guys want to stick around, we've got a lot more conversation to have happen, but that's going to close out the Halloween aspect of this episode. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out Maven. And until next time, I've been Robbie.
Elisa Hansen, Maven of the Eventide, host of Vampire Reviews.
I fucking love it, man. Let's close this chapter, but let's leave the book open for a few minutes. And we're going to stop it there. So the whole idea that we were going to do for you guys is give you a little bit of an extended stinger. You know, hang out, talk for another 5-10 minutes about a couple of geeky things. But that did not happen. We sat down to record an hour-long episode for our Halloween celebration, and Elisa ended up sitting down with me for almost 3 hours. So you guys are not going to get a stinger. You're going to get an entire episode that's going to drop the Friday after Halloween. I believe that's November 3rd. I was blown away by that. It was more than I even could have hoped for. Such a sweet person, such a cool person. And by the way, after this episode was recorded, I checked out some of her writing, and she's legit too. So make sure you're checking out Maven of the Eventide on YouTube, Vampire Reviews. Check out Elisa Hansen as far as her writing goes. You're not going to be disappointed. Even the satire that was written with Lindsay and Nella over at Shea Apocalypse, it's very good, believe it or not. So make sure you're checking her out. Make sure you stay tuned for all the awesome guests that we're going to be having leading up to Halloween, and also the second episode with Elisa Hansen. It's just Elisa that time. No Maven. So even though we talk a little bit about vampires. But until then, I've been Robbie. This is the Nerdynomicon. Keep it creepy, folks, I guess. I think that's going to be the tagline I'm going to go out with here.